Hey Matthew, I'm going to take a look at your prose poem, The Butcher, and I'm going to start, I'm going to read both of these drafts out loud, starting with the first draft, and then we'll look at the revision, listen to it, and see what still needs to be done on it. So I'll start out reading first draft of The Butcher. He comes in holding the butcher knife drenched with blood. He brings with him pig heads and the tongues of cows. His apron is already splattered with the blood of the slain. He sharpens his knife, the blade glowing like the sun. Cold sweat runs down his forehead. A dead goat will be the next victim of his knife. His knife will cut in deep. It always does. Already he can feel the goat blood on his hands. The blood will be cold, of course, but it will make his heart warm. And here is the second draft, The Butcher. He comes into the meat locker holding the butcher knife, his apron drenched with blood and matter. He brings with him buckets filled with pig heads and the tongues of cows. His knife in his stained hands drips with the blood of the slain. He sharpens his knife with flint till the blade shines like the sun. A cold sweat now runs down his forehead. A newly slain goat will be the next victim of his knife. His knife will cut deep and hard. It always does. Already he can feel the goat's innards and blood on his hands. They will be cold and clammy, of course, but they will make his heart warm. So I think this is a really interesting little picture. And, you know, it's, on the one hand, it's sort of like this is what a butcher does. And on the other hand, it's got this imagery that's really unnerving and sort of frightening. Not sure exactly which way you're going here. I don't know if you're trying to do just sort of an examination of this profession and look at it with very look at it closely and look at it objectively and sort of like hold it under a magnifying glass. Or if you are trying to like draw some deeper connotations here. So if you are trying to do one or the other, for the next revision, you'll want to try to make it clear exactly which way you're trying to go. So let's take a look here. So the first draft and the second draft are changed in sort of minor ways. You know, you've added and changed some details, maybe punched up the imagery a little bit. But they are very similar poems, and so I think for me, the things that you've revised and changed that I like, and some of the things that I don't like, are somewhat of a matter of taste. So your first line, he comes in holding the butcher knife drenched with blood. He comes into the meat locker holding the butcher knife, and that's fine. I think I actually like that revision better since you're more specific about where he is and what he's holding. And the butcher knife drenched with blood is sort of like a, you know, almost a horror movie cliche, right? The things that come next, you've rearranged a little bit the apron and the buckets filled with pig heads and the tongues of cows. One thing that you want to think about for your next revision is the rhythm of your poem. It's very much like a sort of one of those list poems where you start out with this same sort of construction. He, and what does he do, and what about him are you describing? So this actually reads less like a prose poem, which would be sort of like a little paragraph, and more like a list poem, which is fine. But you want to make sure that sort of repetitive rhythm is what you want. And I think it works. I think that if you are going for that eerier sort of connotation, you could really like sort of punch it up a little bit, making the parts, you know, I sort of liked that about the first draft where the sentences were very short and very direct. You sort of extend some of those in the second draft, throwing that kind of eeriness, that like really sort of cold and calculated, like da 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 da, just like one sentence coming after the other, is changed a little bit in the revision. So again, that's a decision you'll have to make about what you want to do with the actual rhythm of it. I like, he brings with him buckets filled with pig heads and the tongues of cows. And then, but again, that sort of, the just act of buckets filled with adds enough to that sentence that it does throw that original rhythm off. I like actually the first sentence about your butcher. His apron is already splattered. That part, but with blood and matter instead of like blood of the slain, is again a little bit of that cliche kind of biblical language almost. But it's the splatter is more descriptive language than his apron drenched. And also, if you sort of combine these two, his apron's splattered with blood and matter or something like that. But putting that splatter and matter in the same sentence will actually serve to emphasize the sound and the rhythm that you have going on. So it's sort of like a combination of those two, the first draft and the second draft, is sort of nice. The next sentence, he sharpens his knife with flint. I think you should consider stopping there, since a blade shining like the sun is, again, falling into that sort of abstract, cliche, like dead metaphor language. Like shine like the sun, you know, is something that you hear so often that it doesn't make you see anything anymore. And in fact, you know, if something is shining like the sun, it's like blinding. And I don't think a blade is actually going to be blinding you. But something else to consider, you know, he sharpens his knife with flint, and then something that a blade does do is glint. And so again, you could consider doing this sort of like with the splatter and matter, like a kind of like internal rhyming, and an ear to those sounds in your poem. You know, that might be a little bit too obvious, like flint and glint or splatter matter, but it is something that you might want to play around with a little bit to see if you can, which details you want to emphasize with that. A cold sweat, again, that's falling into this language that I've heard a lot, and I don't think it actually adds anything to the poem. If you want to, I guess I'm not quite sure what you're saying. Is he nervous? Is he working hard? If he's working hard, it would be a hot sweat, but a cold sweat makes me think that he's nervous about something. So I'm not really sure exactly what you're trying to say with the cold sweat. If you want to say he's nervous, like maybe talk about the way his hand grips the knife, or like does it tremble a little bit. What you go on to say next makes me think that he's actually quite a professional. You know, he always cuts deep. He knows that it's going to make him warm. And I think that what you're trying to do is make this juxtaposition between the coldness of where he is and the meat that he's working with, and like how he feels, and how he feels after his knife starts to make these cuts. So so you could say, you know, the breath, his breath comes out in a mist from the cold, or something like that. But something that's a little bit more concrete in its imagery, and something that will still stay with it, with that juxtaposition thing that you're doing, but that will be a little bit more clear for your reader to like see what is actually going on with this guy. Because, you know, I think on the one hand you're staying on this surface level with just these plain and short descriptions of what's going on, but I think you're actually trying to sort of like dig a little bit deeper and show us a little bit past the surface of what the butcher is just doing. Like if we were just seeing him do this stuff, like what's actually going on with him, especially that last line, you know, they will make his heart warm. You're getting into his psyche there a little bit. So another line sort of like that but made, oops, sorry, but made to, made more of a direct connection for your reader would help here. Okay, so a newly slain goat will be the next victim of his knife. And first of all, it does not roll off the tongue. But second of all, it really threw me off here. I was like, a slain goat is the victim? I didn't quite understand there. I was like, he's not killing the goat's already dead, so how's the goat a victim? So again, I think what you need to do is make a decision about how you want to handle this. What I see happening is, by calling the goat a victim of his knife, you're saying, you're trying to like draw that more like scary connotation again. However, for me as the reader, it's just not coming quite through yet. One thing to think about doing is to make that goat, make me see that goat, he grabs the bristly hide of a newly slain goat, and raises his knife to slash it or something like that. Maybe even go a little bit more into what the detail is here. Like, does he he walks in with the buckets of pig heads, and then all of a sudden he has a goat. So what does he do with the buckets? Where does he put them? Does he process them in some way, or does he just set them down? And then does he grab this goat and hang it on a hook, or is the goat already on the hook? These are some of the more details that you could give to your reader, and that I think could serve to do your purpose of like really getting us into this kind of like creepy process that's going on. The other thing that threw me off about this was if the goat is newly slain, then his innards wouldn't be cold and clammy yet. If he was newly slain, they would still be warm, right? Because the goat is warm-blooded. So those two details really sort of threw me off as well. So if the goat is not newly slain and has actually had time for its body to cool down, then do something a little bit different with that description of the goat. The next part, his knife will cut deep and hard, it always does. I sort of struggle with this line as well. And I know I'm like bringing up a lot of things that I struggle with, but I really think at this point you're digging into the details of what's going on here, and you want to really make them as strong as possible. I just want to pause here and say, I really like the idea of this poem. I think it brings up a lot of different things for me. Like, sort of the ambiguity is really awesome, and it brings up questions of like, is Matthew, or is the narrator, is the author like saying this is a good thing, or is he like criticizing our eating of meat, or is it like something deeper going on here? Like, why does this guy like cold and clammy guts? Why is it making his heart warm? Or is it like that's how he makes his living, so that makes him happy? There's all this stuff that you don't just come out and say that really like adds layers to it. But I really think that you just want to make sure that you're focusing on not going into this abstract language, that you're really following through with this really deep examination that you're doing. I hope that makes sense. The addition of end clammy in that second to last line, I also didn't think was needed. The blood will be cold, of course, I thought was a really great, and like, really? It's, of course, blood is cold? Like, that's weird. Like, threw me off. The cold and clammy kind of just, served to distract me a little bit, instead of, like, being that direct rhythmic sentence. And then, but they will make his heart warm. I think, I will accept that sort of abstract language of the heart, like warming of the heart, that we hear a lot, because it's you do a good job of making us feel chilly, and then you throw this like strange last sentence that like leaves me in this place that feels like uncomfortable, but cool, uncomfortable in a good way. So I think this is a really interesting piece. I hope some of these suggestions help you as you continue to work on it. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to let me know. Thanks, Matt. Good luck with it.